This time we're going to look at a front-loading VCR, a little bit more modern than the top loaders that we were looking at previously. Let's have a look around it. You see, this is a National NV-250. It's a fairly basic model. It doesn't have any exciting special effects or other features. It's got a momentary push button for the power, not the latching switch like we saw on those older top-loading models. Front loading system. There's record, there's one-touch record, which allows you to record for preset lengths of time, so you don't have to remember to stop it later on. There's a flap here which covers the clock and programming controls. There's picture, soft, sharp, and the tracking control. And then the main important buttons, play and stop, nice and big there. It does have pause and still advance, and also there's review and cue, rewind and fast forward while playing. The tuner, instead of what we saw on the other ones which had individual variable resistors to control each channel, which then was selected by mechanical buttons, this one has up and down electronic buttons for the selecting the channel, and the tuner it's still got the variable resistor, but then with this lever here, or this knob, but once you've set it and you click that, the memory button, it will then save the reference voltage in a memory and then generate it later on. And then it's got a fine-tuning adjustment. When I look very closely at this, you can see there's blue dots of stuff there, which I've now probably got all over my hands, which makes me think that there's batteries or capacitors or something leaked inside it and it's all ruined. So that's something to look forward to when we take it apart. On the back, as usual, mono audio in out, video out, the color test signal switch, the RF section there, RF in and out, and the channel selector, and then the power input rating label. Alright, let's take it apart, have a look inside, and then we'll try it out. See what exciting things are inside this. I think it's a new mechanism compared to the previous National models we were looking at. A bit more compact, additional motors because of the front loading. Look at that. Weirdly there doesn't appear to be capacitors or batteries around there that are leaked. On that, maybe it's just some dust. Wow, that's really interesting. I don't know what that is. Look at that, there's blue stuff all over the bits of that tuner. I think something fell, some blue dust stuff fell on the top of this machine and it got into the, like, through this tuner thing. I don't know, it's pretty weird. Anyway, it doesn't look, whatever that is, it doesn't really look like capacitor leaking or battery. It's like that stuff, that copper sulfated stuff, but I don't know if that's what it really is or not. Anyway, you can see you've got video head. It's now 4 head because they've got the still. They didn't advertise it as super still, or which is what they would say when it's 4 head. Unless maybe that label along the top is missing. Doesn't say it anywhere else. Anyway, it looks like it's got 4 heads, which means it can do a clear still. And if it had slow motion, then it would be able to do that a lot clearer too. So it's a machine where the capstan motor drives the reels. You can see by turning the capstan that the idler down there moves. Guessing that the rubber's all perished on that. It looks like it has. The back tension band is okay, because they often flake off. The capstan's a little bit dirty, and the pinch roll is probably perished and gone all smooth. And yeah, they got a flexible connector thing going onto the mechanism. It's probably almost the only connection on there. And then you can take out cassette loading mechanism, which uses this motor here. There'll be some red screws down there for doing that. Down there and down there. And that comes out on its own wires, which are here, so that you can load a cassette into it and have that flipped out somewhere else for testing and adjustment of the mechanism. Let's plug it in and see what happens. Got this tape husk to try in it. As a first go, yeah, it doesn't power up. Yeah, that's disappointing. The clock is lit up. I guess something's had enough. Is it on time record? Is that... no. We might have to do a repair video then. Alright. Oh, it came on briefly. Look at that. Do you think it's just the power button that's the problem? Is that possible? Yeah, anything's possible. Anyway, it seems to be on now, so I guess it's not a power supply issue. It's possibly a switch issue. We'll take the front off in a bit and have a look. It doesn't interplay. Yeah, maybe all the buttons are ruined. Anyway, it's in play mode. The various things seem to be working okay. It's got quite weak take-up, so it'll be at risk of chewing tapes, but... yeah, well... guess we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Alright, let's try an actual tape in it and see what happens. Put display on. Seems to be working fine. What about pause? Look at that. You get a nice clean picture when pause. The frame advance is alright. You see what it's doing, if you listen very carefully, when you click frame advance button on the front, it will adjust itself until there's no noise bars on the screen. Well, it is doing it, it's just the capture can't see that. If we look on the other monitor, pause it, you see the noise bar goes down the screen until it gets to the edge of the picture, then it stops. Each time you push frame advance. So it's gentle, it's carefully adjusting the position of the tape relative to the head to get the edges of the field out of the active picture area, and it makes a little clicking noise as it adjusts very slightly. So that's nice. Let's see if it draws the tape back in. Does it rewind and fast forward function? Does seem to. The buttons are a bit hard to push though. I think that was the problem with the power switch, power button. It's not a fault, but it must be worn out. Maybe this has been well used. It seems to be working fine though, so that's good. Just take a look at this board. You can see it's got some hinges there. Yeah. The belt on the loading motor is slipping. Alright, we'll get that switched off. So it is a bit damaged because that's cracked off there on the front. So it must have had a tough time at some point. So let's take the bottom off, have a look in there. Then we can take the front off. Then we can take this out and we can lift this up. And we'll have a look at all the bits and pieces. because there's a good dust will be falling out of it now. 30-40 years of dust. I think this will be an 80s machine from the 80s, late 80s. Look at that. So it's got one of those open type of capstan motors where it's just a circuit board with the coils on it, and the frame is the same as the chassis of the VCR. So it's very optimized. It's not a separate motor that's been installed. The motor is formed as part of the chassis. Quite a cunning way of reducing costs and materials. And then there's the loading motor here for the mechanism. Very slippy belt, as you get with this stuff. The loading mechanism, mode switch there, so it can tell what state it's in. And that's reference to the chassis. So it's got 3 signal wires coming out, and then I guess the common is the chassis. Pick up there for the position and speed of the capstan motor, which looks like an audio tape head. On the circuit board there's power supply bits, there's video processing circuits, then there's motor drivers which have that exposed heatsink part on them, a little bit warm since they've been running. There's a motor driver there, the SIL package would be for this one probably, and then there's some microcontroller for system control. Now the front is clipped on with these, but we got to take the screws out on the top first before we can remove it. Now that should come off when that is unclipped. Okay, on the front, see this chassis here can be used for multiple models. There's extra clips down the side there that weren't used by this front panel, and also you can see there's extra molding there where another model would have a larger board there with more controls on it. Interesting that they're using this plastic clip thing to hold that board on, or is it just a spacer? Maybe there was problems with that getting pushed in. Let's see, there's a faded red screw. It's just some kind of spacer thing. I guess that button there's worn out. Been turned on and off too many times. So the other main control board there, or controls board, just 2 screws. Again, were red but have faded. It's weird that they fade even though they're under the housing, but don't fade where it was screwed into the plastic. You think that light has been coming in through the window from this display all the way in and fading the screws? I don't know. So that lifts up, and you see these pokey bits come out of there, so it now means this board can lift upwards. This is a ground wire on that screw, which goes to a middle bracket which goes down and screws onto the cover, and probably also goes around and screws onto the bottom. Yeah, to keep everything grounded. There's different options here. Other models can have a lot more parts fitted on here, and different I/O things. There's an AV connector that's combined. Don't know what that would be. Some kind of DIN plug maybe. And then probably more audio for stereo sound perhaps. We don't have to take any of that off. Sometimes you have to undo screws from the back to lift the boards out. I don't know if that needs to come out. Nope. So now that's lifted up for servicing, so you can now take measurements on both sides of the board. You can lift up the tuner to get that out of the way. So that's on like a 3-way hinge thing there, from the front board to this main board and to the tuner board. So you can access everything for taking measurements easily. That comes in from the power supply. That comes in from the tuner modules there. Power supply is just that, which goes into this area here. Yeah, where there's a bit more power supply stuff, because there's a heatsink there, which has got a little vent hole to help it breathe. And then there's another power regulator on the head drum, like usual. It's quite common for those to go, the soldering to go bad on those. Yeah, the little regulator there sits in the frame of the head drum motor, and that keeps it slightly warm all of the time, just above room temperature, to avoid condensation forming on the drum. Dew. Yes, if you've moved it from a cold place into a warm place, then yeah, these big bits of metal will stay cold and condensation can form on them, and if you tried to play a tape like that, it's going to get stuck to the head and probably wreck the tape and possibly mess up this. So there's a dew sensor which measures humidity there, and so that will lock out the machine if it detects too much moisture in the air. Have a close-up look at what's on this board. Fairly nicely optimized. It's all on one board with a few subboards hanging off of it, and then some subboards hanging off those subboards. There's a little green thing there with surface mount parts on it, which is interesting. It's a module with like a flexible PCB fused onto an aluminium substrate, and then surface mount parts attached to it to help with assembly and help with high density components. See the power supply bits down there. A couple of devices on heat sinks in a fiberglass sleeve, and motor drivers. That one there's got a temperature sensing device on the top of it, or thermal fuse, so that if something goes wrong, trip the thermal fuse and cut off before something catches on fire. Alright, we'll fold this back down. Just get these wires going in the right place. Wonder why the hinge got relaxed because I pulled it out so far. There we go. Oh, I guess that's... Oh, don't bend that too much. Should go under there so it stays nice and tidy. Yeah, interesting that some, but not all, of the wires here have connectors on them. You can see there, they have the type of connectors that this sort of pre-tinned wire pokes into only a couple of times. If you've pulled that out and you plug it back in, then the cores of the wire get a bit bent, and then it doesn't want to do that again. So you've got to be careful. So it's been done so that this part and the front stay together forever, because that's permanently soldered at both ends, but the stuff that goes from this front board down to the main board can be unplugged along there, and also the stuff that comes up from the main board onto here can be unplugged here at this end. So at least they've allowed for easy board swapping without having to desolder parts, or desolder cables, because that would be quite annoying. I don't know how often you'd actually do board swapping on these things though, because back then it probably would do some component repairs, because it depends how much of a hurry you're in and the availability of the parts. Let's take off the cassette loading mechanism. You can undo these ground wires first. Then there's two screws which stay fairly well retained in the mechanism, so those lift up. And then it unclips from the front end. Didn't really do that very much, but yeah, there's a little hooky bit on there, and they hook under little tabs there, and those screws, they're not retained, but they feel like they are. It's because they've got a little bit of a lead in before the thread starts on them. Yeah, so you'd put a sheet down and of some sort, and then put that like that on there so it doesn't short anything out, and it would let you run the loader tape in there and then run the mechanism while it's open like this, so that you can do alignments and adjustments. We should try it. We've got to find a thing to insulate that though. Let's have a look. Get that wire off. Like that. See, that flex is easier, well, more reliable for removing and inserting because it doesn't have those individual little wires that get bent. But the problem is with these old ones, the stabilizer piece, that blue bit on the back, will just flake off because the glue is just dried up and stopped working. So you gotta be really careful now on these old machines when you pull them out and the bit flakes off. Falls off. What can we put there? Maybe this container. So let's see if we can load the tape in. Maybe it was the pushing of the front panel part to the buttons underneath that was the problem. I don't know, let's try this. Oh. Is there some lever that's not getting pushed? No, there you go. So we've loaded the tape in, and now we can enter play mode. Like that, with it all opened up. So you can poke it around while it's running, get the back tension sorted out, which is the major problem in these things because the little felt band flakes off of that metal strip. There are tools for checking the torque, and I might have some as of recently, but they might not fit on this machine. I think we should get them out and have a look, since I haven't really played with those yet. Got hold of a bunch of tools and things, but they're not really for old VCRs, they're for video cameras, newer video cameras. But here we go. A torque gauge. And I think the problem is we need an adapter. Torque gauge comes in this special box. You see, it's got this adapter for going on to probably DV or DV cam. So you insert that in there, but I don't think that would go big enough. No. The chuck is not big enough to fit on there. Oh, yeah, it can kind of munt its way in. That's a shame. But yes, what happens is you attach this to the device you want to measure the torque of, and it will stall it and measure the force by a spring in here and how much it manages to twist that spring, and then you can read the measurement of that scale there. So the specified torques for these rewinding, fast forwarding, playing, that it should meet in order to not chew up even the dodgiest, stiffest tapes. There's another one, but again, I need an adapter before I can use that on these VCRs. It's just got a different range on it. It might do. Otherwise, why would you have two of them? Okay, so that one goes up to 90 on that red scale, whereas this goes to 600, so this, yeah, it's got a very strong spring in this one. Yeah, so if you're doing VCRs properly, you have the adapter that goes on there and allows it to fit over. Maybe I could make that out of the reel of a tape. Oh, I see, it does go in both directions. So the green scale reads when it's turning in that way, and the red scale reads when it's turning that way. Yeah, so that's something you would do to make sure the VCR is set up properly. To assess the condition of the idler tire there, because it's all cracked. Yeah, the rewind button's not very good. It doesn't stay in. This VCR has no remote control ability. Yeah, I guess that's a pretty basic model then. No ability to have a remote. And I see it's given up now. It's probably going to eject the tape. No. Yeah, the buttons are definitely wrecked. That's a shame, but you can see when it goes into rewind mode, it releases the back tension by moving that arm in a little bit. So that's in the normal position where the tape runs around it, and it provides the back tension to keep the tape at a certain pressure against the head and not slack. And then when you go to rewind, it loosens it off a bit to there, so that it's not providing any tension. I'm not really sure why they put red screws on the head amp there. Presumably you'd take that off. Is that because if you're replacing just the head part, the upper drum, you'd desolder where those arrows are pointing, undo the screws and pull that off. Put on a new one, use a head puller which screws into those two screws there and pushes down on that while pulling up. But I guess if you're replacing the whole head drum assembly, maybe when the bearings wear out, that's not very common unless you're thrashing it, then you'd undo those red screws. Those are very difficult to undo usually, those screws. Not all machines, but it's because it's up on a little bit of sheet metal bent up to there, so if you push too hard you'll bend it. But you've got to have the right screwdriver, number 2 JIS, and then they'll undo, no worries. Just like that. Yeah, I remember before getting JIS screwdrivers, destroying those mounts, trying to get this head amp off in a number of VCRs. But yeah, that just unplugs. It's got a bit of stuff in there. Yeah, amplifier and some passive components, a bunch of little service mount thingies there. And that just plugs down there. Yeah, even just tightening it, that little mount bends. Very careful, gotta be careful. And we should be able to eject the tape. Yes, it ejects nicely, like that. And that will reinstall. Just put it down forward a little bit. You can see those screw holes are no longer aligned because it's pushed, well, that way, backwards I guess. And then you bring it back and that locks in the little clips at the front. And then you can put in those screws, these ones here with the leaders on them. The lead-in bit on the thread. And then important, don't forget to connect up the ground wires. And I guess switch the power off. I should put that cable back in the right orientation so it's, oops, rip that wire out as well, so that those wires are coming out from under it. Perfect. There's a look at the National NV-250. Pretty basic, no remote control VCR. Still works though, after all that time. Yeah, so there is a date marking on this molding. Those things that look like clocks. So it's pegs that they put into the die, and they can rotate into a number of positions. So this one's pointing to 84, and then it's one that goes 0 to 9, so I'm not sure what that is. So I guess it's 1984? Hard to know because all the Japanese ICs, they don't have a date code that I can easily understand on them. They might have a Japanese date. There'll be, yeah, that there will be the Japanese date, 59, which will be sometime in the 80s. Great, good VCR, still working order, sort of. Just need to replace the tactile switches on the front. Stay tuned, next time we'll take a look at some other stuff. We might revisit that Sony F5 video camera, because I got a screen in. It's one of those really cheap ones from AliExpress, so we might try replacing that in that cinema camera, see if that works or not. And yeah, we also got the SXS card Pro Plus version, so it should be good enough to use with that camera. So we'll have a go on that in a later video, and we'll also look at more VCRs. Stay tuned for that.